I think I'm recording this at just the perfect time. A thunderstorm is rolling in, the mood is being set, it's got that spooky, gloomy kind of atmosphere, and I'm ready to listen to some really intense power 80s metal. Let's dive into this one. Skeleta by Ghost. So, Ghost shouldn't need too much of a big introduction. They're a rock metal band, I believe, from Sweden, getting their start in the early 2010s, and I came onto the scene with their third record of Meliora, which I absolutely adored. Listened to their first two records, love those as well. The album since then, like Prequel, was fine. I enjoyed that one quite a bit. It wasn't quite my favorite, and I know a lot of people love that. And Impera, yeah, I feel like Impera was their first misstep. One of the things that I really enjoy about Ghost is kind of like the padding around the band. You know, like you've got this whole myth, you got this whole storyline going on with the band of, you know, the clergy, the overall organization, the whole religious and mysticism aspect of it. Because, like, on the face value, you know, it's this satanic cult kind of playing this extremely catchy and extremely fun rock metal music. Like I always say that Ghost is, if you picture a very spooky, scary, gothic haunted house and there's like a serial killer running around inside, but on the inside it's Scooby-Doo and the gang running from like room to room running away from this creature. That's kind of the mythos and kind of the vibe that I get with Ghost. And I just love that they're just fun. You know, like it's very tongue-in-cheek. All the Satanist stuff is very tongue-in-cheek. And in fact, at this point, they basically shoved off all the, you know, allusions and allegories to the Bible and to Satan and all that, which I think works into their detriment. But if you want to get a wider audience, I can understand why they're doing that. As I mentioned, Impera, their last album from 2022, for me was a little bit of a letdown because it kind of lost a lot of that gothic, dark, ambient soundscapes that I really like, you know, that really gothic kind of a soundscapey. They traded it out for more of a 80s stadium metal, 80s glam metal that it was fine, you know, and that album has grown on me. But with the few tracks that we got in preparation for Skeleta, you know, we got Sanitized right off the get-go, and immediately I'm like, oh, we're back with the whole Satanist aspects, you know, it's like blasphemy, heresy, save me from the monsters that is deep in my soul. I've Satanized, right? And right from the get-go, we're like, okay, we're getting back into that aspect. The track itself was a banger. We're getting a little bit more of the gothic. Yeah, we're still very much embracing the whole 80s glam, the 80s hair, the 80s power ballads and that kind of stuff. And that is also seen again on the second big release, which was, I believe it's pronounced like Yerma. Again, it kind of has this like really 60s, 70s kind of a hammer horror feel to it, you know? And I really appreciate that. Again, tongue-in-cheek, kind of strange feeling. You know, I love the guitar works, and all the musicianship that is found on here is fantastic. And Peacefield was the final one of the trio that, you know, really stood out. And I really enjoyed how these three tracks were kind of giving us a great idea for what this album is going to be. So, all that being said, let's talk about the actual music that's found on here. I'm going to do some broad brush strokes first. I'm going to go into some specifics later on. First off, the overall feel of this album is still kind of doing a little bit what Impera was doing in terms of that 80s ballady, glam, hair, power metal aspects that we got. And I'm a little disappointed with that. You know, I was kind of hoping that we would get a little bit more of the gothic side of things, a little bit more of the creepy side of things, a little bit more of the satanistic kind of things. And outside of Satanized and a few tracks here and there, we don't really get any of that. You know, that's still very much in the background rather than the foreground. You know, it almost felt like, I believe my buddy Ian over on Rhyme Signatures put it best, where they were kind of like this Satan-fronted pop band, and now it's this pop band that's just kind of flirting with Satanism. And I feel like that's kind of where we're at this point. So yeah, a little bit saddened there, but where this album does shine is within the musicianship. And you know, if the legends be true, Frederick over from Opeth is one of the faceless ghouls, and he's providing a lot of the chops within the guitar works. And the guitar works found across this record definitely have that heritage and sorceress stink from those two Opeth albums. You know, it's got that meat, it's got that drive, and you can kind of see that they're not too far off base. This is definitely found on some of the deeper tracks like De Profundis Borealis. Definitely has that really meaty, very chuggy guitars, but also has these soaring soundscapes. A track that I'm going to talk at length in a little bit of Umbra, 100% definitely has that feeling of that very driven, very soaring guitars that I particularly love. And I think the thing that I wish was a little bit more on here was the keyboard work. The keyboards are still here. They're very, front and foremost in terms of atmosphere setting, but I don't hear a lot of like the keyboard solos themselves. And I think one of the star performers for the guitars is the first song off of the second side of this record, because I do think of this album in two sides. Cenotaph has just this great 80s glam metal. I think at this point I'm going to talk a little bit more in specifics about what I really love about this record. Talking about Cenotaph, immediately, like, this is a picture perfect track where it's like, it is just catchy. I'm humming along, I'm singing along, and I can't help it. Like, I feel like Cenotaph is a love child between ABBA's Waterloo and a Journey song of some kind. Either Don't Stop Believing or Touching, Love, and Squeezing. Like, definitely those two tracks are just melded together to create the Cenotaph. The same can be said about, as I mentioned, the De Profundis Borealis, as well as Marks of the Evil One. And Marks of the Evil One is definitely, the Four Horsemen of the Apocalypse, and it's one of the only other songs outside of Satanized, that has more of an allusions of the Bible and Satan and all that. And, I wish we had a little bit more of that. But it's got that drive, it's got that oomph about it, and I can't help but sing along. Like, these songs are super duper catchy. Like, I can't stress how catchy these freaking songs are. A perfect example of just how catchy these are. The fourth track of Guiding Lights is a power ballad, and when I first heard Guiding Lights, I'm like, I don't really appreciate ballads. I'm not really here for a big power ballad, especially right in the middle of the first side. But the more I listen to it, the more I can't help but sing along to it. Like, I'm grooving along to a song that originally I was just like, ugh. Like, once we hit that chorus, I can't help but belt out that the road that leads to nowhere is long. And I'm just like, it's just it's so infectious. It gets into you and you can't get it. You can't shrug it off. You're like, okay, fine. One track that hasn't done that yet that I'm just like, ugh, is Melissa Amori. This is basically a Kiss ripoff song. This is like, I'm shooting my love missiles right between your eyes. It's like, well, why don't we just talk about the love gun at that point? And I know that there's a lot of, one-to-one for Kiss and Ghost, but it just, which is a shame because the actual music that's found on that track is driven, it's hard, it's got this really fun and bounce to it. But once you get to the lyrics, I'm like, my guys, my dudes, what are you doing? It's also at this point that I feel like the structure of this album and the actual structure of a lot of these songs begin to get repetitive. Most, if not all, the tracks are verse, chorus, bridge, chorus. And it wouldn't be that big of a deal if it wasn't so apparent and so obvious and they weren't doing anything to kind of play around a little bit with the structure. And I know all of Ghost's big tracks follow those structures. Mary on a Cross, Square Hammer. And so when we get to one of my favorite tracks, if not my favorite track off this album, and might be one of my favorite tracks from Ghost overall, of Umbra, it becomes so apparent to me that I get a little bit taken out. Before I talk about Umbra, because I want to end this review on a very high note, outside of the repetitiveness of the actual song structures, the other thing that I wish is that all these tracks are a little too short. Like, so many of these tracks end just as they're starting to get going. I always point, once again, to Cenotaph, De Profundis Borealis, as well as Umbra. Like, all these tracks just kind of cut themselves short at the legs, and I wish they had either a longer bridge or another chorus or something to play with the song structure a little bit to make it a little bit more satisfying. Because, this album isn't a very long one. It's only 46 minutes long. And I'm almost okay, like I actually am okay, that there's only 10 tracks on here. I just wish the tracks were a little bit longer. And I know that's the prog head in me. I always wish the song was a little bit longer. But when you take a track like Satanized, when you take a track like Satanized that is concise, that has a very clear beginning, middle, and end, and it doesn't feel like it needs to go on for much longer, and then you compare it with a track like Cenotaph that does feel as if it should go on longer, that stark comparison becomes much more glowingly apparent. Another example, of course, is Excelsius, the final track, the 10th track, and what should be this powerhouse of a track. It is the longest track at just over 6 minutes long, but it doesn't feel like it, and that works to its advantage and its disadvantage because it's so, so concise and so tight. It feels like it should go on for another handful of minutes. I could have seen this stretching off into the 7 or 8 minute length and really build up that ending, because the whole track itself is the apparent awareness of your own mortality, being terrified of the end, talking about the rainbow road and being like, yes, I too am afraid of eternity. And that essence is just, and I get that, okay, the song ends short because lives end short and blah, 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 blah. But like when you do the song a disservice, that's where I have a little bit of an issue for. So, all right, let's talk about Umbra. This track is very clearly my favorite track off this album and might be my favorite track from the Ghost discography. And all of that has to do with that just amazing bridge work that is being done at the latter half of this track. The soundscapes, the guitar works, like it almost makes me frustrated about the rest of the album with how good this track is. I'm like, well, where was all of this on the other tracks? Like, where was this amazing guitar work? Where was this amazing song structure? I can feel the band having this juice and they're not utilizing it, and it makes me more frustrated than anything else. So anyway, all that being said, Skeleta was a little bit of a mixed grab bag. A little bit of a mixed grab bag, if I'm being perfectly honest. I think this is much more balanced than the last two albums that we had. I felt like Prequel and Impera were very highly front-loaded, and I have heard many people say that this album is too, but I don't necessarily feel that, just because of how much I really love Marks of the Evil One, Cenotaph, and Umbra. Like, those three tracks are really the star performers of this album once you've digested the first three tracks of Peacefield, like Kirma and Satanized. In my mind, I feel like this is a much more balanced record. It's very similar to Meliora was very balanced in that sense. But some of those negatives that I have, the tracks being a little too long, some of the tracks not really hitting as much as I was hoping to. I'm looking at you, Missilia and Mori. I just feel like there's a little bit more of a balancing act, but because of that, there is a little bit more of a mixed grab bag. It also feels a little bit more, I don't know, not quite like a cohesive whole like some of their last records did. But in the end, I still had a great time with this one. I will be definitely listening to this one quite regularly because of, again, just how catchy it is. I can't help myself but love and continue to dive into these tracks. And that really shows to a really fun and great album. So I think my final rating for this record will be Skeleta by Ghost is an album that I would absolutely download. I think I just have to make peace with myself that, albums like Meliora, like Opus Epidemus, and a little bit of Prequel, those are like behind us. And this is much more of the direction that Tobias Forge and the rest of the Nameless Ghouls want to go, with Impera, with Skeleta, and each iteration of the band brings something new and something fresh. So I'm really excited to see what they have going on. Also, I cannot wait to actually sit down and watch this live. When they come to Canada, I'm going to be front and center because, man, they are an amazing act live. So that's what I've got for Skeleta by Ghost. What did you guys think about this record? Did you love it? Did you hate it? Whatever you thought, please let me know by commenting down below. And I think I'm going to leave you there. Yeah, I'm going to leave you there for today. So thank you all so much for watching. As always, you guys are definitely the best. And until next time, notes out.